Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. My name is GBay99. I hope you all are having a wonderful day. Today, I'm back with a pretty long video where I want to talk to you guys about what makes a champion in League of Legends overpowered. Specifically, I want to address some of the comments and feedback on my recent video, the Completing League Camille episode, where I contended that Camille isn't inherently overpowered. Like I said, we have a lot to talk about, so I'll be jumping right in shortly, but before we do, I want to say a few things. Firstly, this video is eerily similar, if not identical, to a video that Trinomortal released where he discussed similar things pertaining to his main champion Yasuo. I am sure that you guys have all already seen his video because he's a much better YouTuber than myself, and you're probably subscribed to him, I bet. However, I will link his video in the description just in case you haven't seen it. Also, this is a video that's going to be pretty long, so I will be doing what most YouTubers do with long videos and separating it into a few different sections, which I will link in the description down below if you want to jump around. That being said, though, let's go ahead and get started. I honestly do not believe that Camille is a champion who is inherently overpowered. Now keep in mind, I keep on saying inherently overpowered, not just overpowered, because she might be too strong for League of Legends in the current patch. I don't believe I've gotten to play her enough or that she's been out long enough for us to make that judgment, but if she is too strong, she's only too strong by straight numbers being too strong and needing a little bit of scaling back. If she does need some nerfs, those nerfs should be minimal at best in my opinion. I don't think Camille has a broken kit. I don't think the idea behind her is overpowered or stupid, and in fact, the idea behind her might be the reason that I think she's more fun than my main champion sometimes, and that idea is that Camille is an early game 1v1 specialist. That isn't something that we've ever seen in League of Legends, with maybe one exception that we'll get to a bit later, but think about all the other 1v1 duelists in League, or at least the ones that go top lane and specifically fall into the bruiser category. Aurelia, Riven, Yasuo, Jax, Fiora, Tryndamere, all these champions hit their power spikes either in the mid game or the late game. Aurelia, for instance, is incredibly weak in the early game, but once she starts hitting the mid game, she deals a ludicrous amount of damage before eventually falling off if the game drags on. Jax and Tryndamere are champions who start off their weakest at level 1, but only get better and better and better the longer they can drag a game out. Now, some of these champions like Riven or Fiora, you could make an argument have strong early games or strong level 2s, like a Riven player can take Ignite and push a wave early to try and first blood her opponent by getting level 2 first, but those are simply gimp strategies. I don't think you could say any of these champions are their strongest at level 1 or levels 1 through 8 and then they just fall off, they don't get better in the mid game or later on. There are a few champions like that in League, like Renekton comes to mind, but none of them who focus almost solely on being 1v1 duelists. One of the biggest reasons I don't think Camille is overpowered is because to be overpowered, at least in my eyes, you have to do things better than every other champion in your role. Like if you're a mage who's 100% picked or banned in LCS because you outclass every other mage in the game, then you're OP. But Camille isn't even the best of these duelists that you can take top lane. One of the reasons whenever I'm playing ranked I tell my teammates not to ban Camille is obviously I want to play her, but if the enemy team picks her away from me, I know exactly how to beat her in lane and win the game. All you have to do is pick another one of the duelists like Aurelia and not die early on. If I'm playing Aurelia against Camille, I'll just play passive in the early game, let her CS and do whatever, but once I hit 6 and once I hit my mid game power spike, I will out damage her no matter what. I mean, it doesn't matter if she lands her ultimate on me, if she lands both of her Qs, it doesn't matter if she lands her E stun or something. I will simply out damage her in a straight up 1v1 fight. The only way that Camille wins that matchup is if she's able to get early kills and snowball before I hit my power spike, or if I somehow misplay as Aurelia. I think the biggest reason why so many people believe that Camille is stupidly broken is the top lane has had a terrible meta where everyone picks weak laners for the sake of good team fights in the mid and late game. This is why people who enjoy these duelist champions say that they hate tank metas. When players like us want to go top lane and look to 1v1 each other where everyone's trading all sorts of kills, the tank meta can just roll in and say, no, we aren't doing any of that. If you want to play a tank top lane in League of Legends, you don't actually have to worry about the laning phase for the most part. You can pick Poppy, Gnar, Malphite, people that are generally pretty weak in lane early on, at least compared to the duelists who look for kills, and if you do your best to farm and not die, it will be very hard for anyone to kill you. Because most duelists that people play, the damage threats that they have don't power spike until the mid or late game, you have time to farm up some items and become unkillable if you're passive enough. You won't be getting any kills yourself, but that's not what you're looking to do. You're looking to TP into fights and land big ultimates. These champions basically forfeit the laning phase for the sake of trying to get those sick ultimates off in the late game or terrorize the backlines as these unkillable unkillable monsters, and the only instance where you might see them win a laning phase is when they're matched up against another weak laner, where then they can start thinking about going for kills. But they have insane late games because their early games are so garbage. That's how they're balanced out. There are a number of other champions that fit into this category as well who aren't exclusively tanks, namely Echo and Gangplank being the big one. This is why I was able to give first blood to a Gangplank in my completing League video and still managed to get 3 kills after getting back to lane without even needing to recall. A lot of you pointed that as to proof as to why Camille is overpowered in our video, but you couldn't be further from the truth. Firstly, this Gangplank was actually pretty bad. He always took forever to use his oranges when I stunned him. But secondly, Gangplank is one of the worst laners that you can play early game top lane. Gangplank might actually be the worst laner that you can play early game top lane in League of Legends. This is something that people often forget and why I suspect so many believe that Camille is OP. When you've only had to deal with duelists like Aurelia who can't do much in laning phase pre-6, it's pretty easy for some of these weak laners who are tanks and whatnot to get through the laning phase and hit their power spikes, maybe only giving up 1 kill if they misplay or so. But now that you finally have a champion in League of Legends who can punish you for that weak early game, suddenly you have to deal with something that you've never seen before, and rather than learning how to play around it, most people are just crying that she's OP. If you want advice on how to beat Camille, just pick hybrids that can duel her or pick stronger lane tanks like Maokai. But that brings up a pretty interesting question. Why do people think that Camille is overpowered if I really am suggesting that she's not? I mean, it can't all just be good matchups for her, right? And she can deal a pretty insane amount of damage late game for someone that I'm contending is such an early game focused champion. Well, I think looking into the context of how games unfold is a pretty important thing here. I think most people's games playing against a Camille will probably go something like this. Their top laner either picks a tank, a weak laner, or maybe a duelist to try and stack up against her, but they don't know how to play the lane because Camille is such a new champion, and Camille capitalizes by getting a kill or 2 in the early game. She then uses those kills to snowball the lane, taking early towers and putting all sorts of pressure on the map that they then try and come deal with her by ganking or something, but their top laner doesn't bait out the E and she escapes with her E, leaving a lot of people to be super frustrated. By the time the team fight phase rolls around, she's 10-2, destroying everyone, and you just surrender out of frustration. When you have a champion who's so focused on being a powerhouse in the early game, then yeah, they're going to be able to use that to snowball their strength to the late game if they get a crazy number of kills. But this kind of playstyle isn't something that's inherently bad, and it does have some counterplay. Camille is god-awful in teamfights late game compared to those tanks that she's destroying in lane. If you can just tell your Poppy to not die, make it to late game, she will be 10 times more useful than the Camille she's playing against. Not to mention, you can still beat her in lane on your own if you do what I said earlier, just pick a strong laner, make it through the early game without feeding any kills. Most people can't seem to get around how much damage a 15-1 Camille they just played against dealt, but let me ask you a question. Have you ever played against any 15-1 champion who's felt fair? I mean, what about a 15-1 Tryndamere that you literally can't do anything against if your exhaust is down? You know, if you're comparing 15-1 late game duelists, you're probably getting the best deal with Camille since she has very little teamfight potential, very little to help her out beyond the laning phase, and damage that falls off in teamfights compared to those other champions that hit their power spikes. A lot of people look at Camille's abilities and say that she has an overloaded kit that's OP and needs to be nerfed, and while she does have a lot of things going on in her kit, it's not as good as you think it is, particularly in the late game and in teamfights, and it's also entirely necessary for her to be good at all. Let me show you what I mean and go through each of these abilities one by one. Starting off with her passive, Camille's passive is Adaptive Defenses, where her first basic attack will trigger a shield for 20% her maximum health, protecting her from either physical damage or magic damage depending on what her opponent primarily deals. The shield lasts for only 2 seconds maximum, a very brief amount of time. So why does she have the shield? Because it lends to her strength as a 1v1 duelist, especially in the early game. This allows her to plan her aggression in a calculated way where when she chooses to go in, her opponent has to essentially just run away for the first 2 seconds of a fight. The shield only gives one type of protection because it's only supposed to be useful when fighting one opponent, one champion, and it's really not that strong or effective in late game team fights. By level 18, it does have a cooldown of only 10 seconds, so chances are you're going to be able to activate it once in a fight, and yeah, it can be a little annoying to deal with, but it's not enough source of power to help her in that very weak part of her game if the entire enemy team is focusing her down properly. Let's go into her next ability, her Q. This is the auto attack reset that can be activated twice for extra damage if she waits a few seconds before reactivating it the second time. This is her main damage dealing ability, and it's obviously pretty good for 1v1ing. It's also pretty quick in both activations in terms of laning phase, even if you're waiting for the empowered second Q Q to maximize your damage. It's still a lot quicker when you compare it to something like an Aurelia W, where Aurelia has to auto attack for a full 6 seconds if she wants to maximize her damage. This makes trading super easy for Camille in laning phase, but again, throw this ability into late game team fights and what do you have? You do have a lot of damage on a single target, especially if you have a few kills, but it takes a lot of time to get that off in a team fight if you're waiting for the second empowered Q. That's a lot longer in terms of team fights where your opponents, they have their escapes, they have a full team of CC to damage you, focus you down, kill you, and it's clearly not as good of an ability as when you're in a 1v1. But let's move on again to her W, Tactical Sweep. This ability is exclusively for laning. It is straight garbage in teamfights. Tactical Sweep gives the damage in a cone with a pretty long delay where you heal the damage dealt and provide a slow if you land your ability in a specified area. But this ability takes such a long time to wind up and land. It's seriously one of the worst things you can use in a teamfight unless you're maybe chasing someone down to try and finish off a kill. Other than that, the damage it deals and how much it heals is not worth the windup it takes in a fight where you can just auto attack a few more times and deal a lot more damage or maybe throw out another Q. This is why I said in my video Camille has no effective heals in teamfights. She does technically have a heal, but you cannot say this is an effective heal for her to use in teamfights. Even at max rank, it doesn't heal you enough on a single cast to make it worth your while. The strength of this ability is once again traced back to laning phase where you can use it repetitively to sustain whenever you get harassed and whenever you take damage. You can constantly smack your opponent from a distance or the minions to top off your health pool. Sustain is super important for top laners in laning phase, but this actually isn't very useful beyond that. Next up is her E, which is probably her most fun and most annoying ability to deal with. E is the hook shot where she jumps to a wall and then can jump off it, stunning and damaging enemies that she hits. This ability is pretty frustrating to play against if you aren't really accounting for it. If you're ganking a Camille and you don't save your CC for when she's trying to get away, or if you don't tell your top laner to try and bait out the E, then yeah, this will make you pull your hair out when she's able to jump such long distances and get away from every gank you throw at her. But this ability is like an escape on any champion where she is hopeless when it's on cooldown, and because it's also her primary ability that she uses to engage and jump on opponents, it's really easy to bait a Camille into using it and then just turn and focus her down after she does, either in team fights or just on a gank. The shortest cooldown that she will have on this E, if she has it maxed at rank 5 and 40% cooldown reduction, is 6 seconds. 6 seconds is the best that she's gonna get, and that's an eternity in teamfights in particular. Again, this is why I say she doesn't have an effective escape in teamfights in straight 5v5s. If she saves this and doesn't use it for a stun when she's trying to lock someone down, she's gonna be much less useful, but if she uses it to jump in on a target, you will have 6 seconds at worst, I mean more likely 7 to 10 seconds, and that's if she has the ability maxed. You will have those 7 to 10 seconds to focus Camille down and kill her, which is pretty easy to do since she's so squishy. When you see a Camille wall hopping and jumping all over the place in a small skirmish and see her make all these daring escapes, you can very easily look at that and just say that's broken, but I would contend that's just the rule of playing against Camille. You don't chase her down and try and fight her 1 versus 1 or in small skirmishes where she's going to have multiple opportunities to try and escape for the same reason that you don't chase a Singed. And finally, her ultimate, Uber Danger described it as Jarvan's ultimate, but this time Riot got it right, which is basically what it is. Camille lays down an area that knocks back enemies and minions that she traps an enemy champion in who can't get away. Honestly, I don't think this ability is that ridiculous. Enemies can come into the field after being knocked away and help their trap partner kill off Camille or make her run away, which deactivates the area. But there isn't actually too much counterplay to this if you are the trapped victim and you're stuck in a 1v1. The only thing that you can really know is that it has a very short range, so I can understand people getting pretty frustrated and upset about this one. But again, I don't think it's that strong or overpowered that it's really it's warranted any sort of rework. All of these abilities are exclusively to help Camille have successful 1v1s and strong dueling potential, while plenty of them suddenly turn useless in team fights or if the enemy has more than one player that's focusing her down. But you might still be asking, why does Camille need all of this in her kit? Surely all of it isn't necessary for her to be a successful early game 1v1er, right? Well, do you remember that other champion that we could classify as an early game 1v1 duelist I mentioned previously in this video? The only other one besides Camille? That would be Pantheon, a champion that you probably forgot existed because he has a 2.79% play percentage top lane right now, along with a 0.66% ban rate. Pantheon has had similar problems with people calling for him to be nerfed into the ground anytime that he's strong because he has a similar playstyle. Being a good 1v1 early game champion who tries to get kills to snowball and is pretty useless otherwise, that's his exact playstyle. However, the problem with Pantheon is he has no sustain. He has no escape. He has no long range lockdown for a fleeing opponent and is turned into this super polarizing character because of it. Pantheon is an example of what happens when you're a 1v1 early game specialist who can do only that, deal damage and 1v1 people early game. He does have his ultimate to jump into teamfights, so he does have a little bit more than that, but he suffers from some serious problems with his teamfight in organized 5v5s late game, and he's straight garbage if he doesn't get those early kills to snowball with. Riot probably took a look at Pantheon and saw what happened to an early game dueling specialist when you only give them the bare bones of what they need to work, and the result, which is incredibly polarizing. He either does insanely well snowballing kills to a 10-1 score that he tries to then end the game before teamfights happen, or he's just behind the entire game and deals less damage than a Zyra support. The thing I like so much about Camille is that she's something new, an early game 1v1 duelist that actually has abilities and a kit that can keep her viable in ranked without being overly broken. She can still snowball almost as hard as her Pantheon who gets those early kills, but if she doesn't, she's much less useless and she still has some presence in the game. I mean, I know win rates don't actually mean that much in the grand scheme of things, but at the time of making this video, she's actually at a 50% win ratio right now on the button. She does have her flaws in her gameplay, and her kit, as big as it might be, isn't as stupid as you might first think when you take a look at it at face value. She really does need all of that to be useful. If you're starting to take things away, she's going to turn into another Pantheon who's eventually forgotten about and left by the wayside. But finally, I want to ask this question one more time. What makes a champion overpowered in League of Legends? I don't think it's just them having a big kit or big numbers that make you say, wow, look at that damage, that's so busted. It's not that they feel unkillable or impossible to deal with in some of your games. What makes a champion truly overpowered is when they do everything 10 times better than every other character in their role. When you have someone that's outclassing other champions in multiple ways, that it would make you feel like you would never pick another champion if this one isn't picked or banned. That's when someone is actually broken and either needs major nerfs or some sort of rework. I don't think Camille is in that spot right now, and more importantly, I think Camille is healthy for League of Legends overall. You know, the one thing that people say Dota has over League is more creative hero design. Dota designers, aka IceFrog, are more willing to try and go along with the philosophy of everything is OP rather than nothing is OP. Whether it's giving ridiculous stuns or ridiculous number of abilities to a hero's design, Dota seems like it's a game that's much more comfortable with giving heroes creative identities, giving heroes things that no other characters have in the game. It kind of bums me out that when we suddenly have a new champion being introduced to League, a truly new champion who is one of a kind, an early game duelist specialist, the likes of which we've actually never seen, everyone just cries, oh, she's OP, please nerf her, rather than trying to figure out how to play against it. Players could just pay attention to her kit and her weaknesses and try and think for themselves on how to beat her, but this sort of cry hard until Riot nerfs her mentality worries me that we may never see other unique champions put into the game ever again. That might sound pretty dramatic, and it's actually possible that Riot has already introduced other champions in other roles where they're unique to their subclass the way that Camille is unique to 1v1 duelist top lane, but I just don't have the knowledge of other roles and other subclasses to really be able to comment on the matter. But as a top laner and as someone who enjoys playing these 1v1 duelists, it really frustrates me that the first time it's jumped out at me that Riot is releasing a entirely new and creative fun champion, it makes me worried for the future of League of Legends, seeing the entire community reject them with so much hatred. Worried enough to at least release a pretty damn long video. Anyway, if you have made it to the end of this video, I would like to give you a hearty congratulations. This actually isn't too much longer, maybe double the length of one of my normal gameplay videos, but I very rarely go into very long analysis type videos that are more than 10 minutes or so. Maybe leave a comment for me if you enjoyed this video and if you would like to potentially see any more of these long form in-depth videos put out onto the YouTube channel. This was actually pretty fun to make, but regardless, I will see you all tomorrow. Until then, thank you very much for watching. Good luck in solo queue and have a wonderful day.